Good morning. My name is Nate Moore. I'm a member of the applications team here at Melco. I am a struggling one at the moment. Welcome to my studio where I am not at work because, as you can see behind me, there is a blizzard in the works. So, stay safe, and we will talk about needles today. Everything you ever wanted to know and more. So to start, needles have a huge impact on your embroidery. So the size of needle and the type of needle can greatly alter the quality of your embroidery and the success of, did I get thread breaks, or do I have holes in my garment? All of those things can be greatly impacted by the needle itself. So first we need to look at the anatomy of a needle so that we can tell what we're really looking at when we look at the numbers and the styles and those kinds of things. So hopefully you guys can chat in questions. I will do my best to answer them, although because I'm kind of alone here, it may be a bit dodgy, and hopefully Scott can hop in and check out comments as well. So hopefully that's going to work well too. All right, so first things first, anatomy of a needle. What does a needle look like, and what are all the parts of it? So let's bring that up for you guys. All of this that I'm going to be talking about is available in your manual, or a large chunk of it is, and it's formatted slightly different and looks slightly different in different manuals. I just have the Melco OS manual up. Because it's a PDF, I'm just going to hold Control and hit F, as long as I have the right screen selected. And then I can search for whatever I want. So I can, if I'd spell correctly, type in needle and go to next. And here I have needle types and replacements. So I'm going to click on that. And now I go directly to what we're going to be talking about. So how do I replace a needle? Why do I replace a needle? All that kind of good stuff. So needle types and replacements. First part is, how do I replace a needle? Here are illustrations going through everything that we're going to be going through. On the next page, why would I change the needle? Well, it's dull, it's bent, I'm getting thread breaks, I'm fraying, or I have a different application that I need to change for. And then it talks about needle sizes. On the next page, there's a big chart of pros and cons of each size and kind of the range that we deal with. And then below that, you'll have needle points and then needle coatings. So we've got all of that in the manual. I've got a few more illustrations up for you guys here. So let's actually look at the anatomy of the needle. So there is a definite, throwing a needle on to my keyboard, do not fall. There's a definite front and a back to a needle. And if we look at this, these things are really tiny and really tough to see. So on the front of the needle is a long groove that goes all the way down. I typically call that the thread guide. That's going to ease that thread through the fabric. On the back of a needle, and this is actually going to be easier to see from the side, there is a notch taken out just above the eye of the needle. And if you're struggling to see that, I can't imagine why, it's a tiny needle, but what you can do is take the needle and run your fingernail down it, and you'll find that notch. That notch is called the scarf, and that goes to the back of the needle, and that long groove is on the front. So thread guide to the front, scarf to the back. Okay, so now I know how to get it into the machine. And there's lots of other things that are labeled here. We deal with them a little bit differently in that we pay attention to some far more than others. The eye of the needle, that's where the thread goes through, right? And that comes in different sizes. When we're dealing with the embroidery that we typically deal with, we will be dealing with a DBX K5 needle. And all that really means is that the eye of the needle is slightly enlarged. So it's a slightly larger eye for what you're sewing, and that allows the thread to pass through a little more easily. And when we are embroidering, the thread passes through that eye of the needle several times. Mike, before he went to escape this weather, did the math, and I think it was somewhere around 30 times before it gets all the way used up. So as it goes back and forth, it's going to go through that eye. So the smoother the eye, the better. So a polished eye, really, really great. That being said, I have heard of people, when they're changing a needle, sticking an old needle into the eye of the new needle and kind of figuring out the orientation. No, don't do that. You're scratching up the very, very polished eye, and you're going to cause yourself problems. So let's get back to the anatomy. So we've got that eye. And then this whole long part, that's the shaft, and it contains different parts. It's got the blade, which is kind of the straighter part. And then it's got the shoulder where it kind of tapers, and different styles of needles will change kind of how that angle is and where that is. And then you've got the shank and the butt of the needle, which is what goes up into the machine. And then really, really, really tiny on the shank, you will maybe be able to see the manufacturer of the needle as well as the size. So that's on there, whether you can see it or not. If you can't see it, some people will take either permanent marker. I've heard of permanent marker. I've heard of fingernail polish. I've heard lots of different options, but they'll color code their needles with a color coating on the needle right in the lower part of the shank. So below where it goes into the needle clamp, but above where it would go into the fabric, so you're not flaking off and putting stuff into your fabric. All right, so we're going to be changing a needle anytime I'm struggling with a lot of thread breaks. A needle's a really quick way to see, is this a problem? Go ahead and swap it out. If it still persists, then maybe it wasn't the needle, but it's a quick way to kind of troubleshoot. All right, let me try to grab in and see if anybody's commenting. Awesome. I'm not seeing too much just yet, so hopefully you guys are doing all right. All right, so I'm going to go over to the machine, and let's go ahead and change a needle. Set that down, and let's go to the machine. Now, because I am not in the office, well, actually, here, let's come back. So in your operator's kit, you will have screwdrivers. There's a little bitty one, or maybe a little bitty one. These are in some of the newer ones. This is typically used for the adjustment of the tension on the bobbin case. So teeny. You have a little bit bigger one. Older machines may have had a green screwdriver. This kind of replaced that. Same thing. If you want a little bit more leverage for the needle clamp, this is kind of a handy one to have. And then I had mentioned that finding that groove and finding the orientation is a little bit difficult. So what you may want to consider is getting one of these. And it's a teeny little cylindrical magnet. What's really cool about it is because that thread guide is on the front of the needle, it provides two ridges, which makes a very nice little place for that to stick. And so as I rotate around, you can see the orientation of the needle. So as I install it, I know, where my front is. Is it? There we go. All right. So just make sure you stick that to the thread guide. The part number for this is 34274. It's available on Shop Melco, and a lot of you will have it in your ops kits. So just take a look for it. It's probably stuck to a different tool. So let's go back and talk about how this actually works. So thread guide eases the thread through. So the thread's coming down the front. It gets eased through the fabric. As the needle starts to come back up through the fabric, there is friction on the back side of the needle. Okay? And what that does is that causes a loop of thread to form. And that loop of thread is what's caught by the rotary hook and actually forms a stitch. So if the orientation of your needle is a little bit off, that loop is going to be in the wrong spot. And what can happen is it can get missed by the hook, or it can actually have the thread get kind of sliced or pierced or broken by that, and so that can cause you thread breaks. So needle orientation is really important. So what is appropriate needle orientation? Well, appropriate needle orientation is with the eye of the needle 5 degrees to the right. 5 degrees to the right is all of nothing. So how do I know what that is? Well, if you look at a clock face, it's got 60 minutes in it, right? All right, so if I divide that, 1 minute is roughly 6 degrees. And ideally, we are at 5 degrees. So you're essentially just sticking it in there as straight as you can get it, and then just go just enough to the right to know that it's not to the left. There is an acceptable range of 0 degrees to 20 degrees to the right. So if I kind of flatten that clock face out, that's what I've got over here. And that dotted line's what I really want, that 5 degrees, essentially 1 minute to the right. So that's what I'm looking to do. It's not a lot. Again, that needle orientation magnet really, really helps. So I'm going to try to go to my machine. Now, my machine is not the newest, so no making fun of the fact that it's white. But I'm not in the office, so I don't have the new one, but the needle clamp and needle orientation and all that is still the same, so no stress. All right, so I'm going to go over to my machine. All right, now, something to consider, and I didn't even think until Mike was talking to me about it, but you can have the grabber out. Now, this makes it very difficult to access what I'm trying to deal with. So kick this grabber back in, and then you have access to your needles, and it makes your life a whole lot easier. All right, so let's go in, and I left the new screwdriver over by my computer, so I have my old one. I'm going to unthread my needle. I'm just going to stick that up into the spring, and then I'm going to come in and loosen that screw. Now, these screws don't have a ton of threads, so unscrew it 1, maybe 2 turns, but if you keep going, it will come off. So just loosen it enough that you can take the needle out. All right, so I'm going to put that down there. And you'll notice, if you're paying attention, that my needles are a bunch of different colors. We'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so I'm going to grab that new needle. I'm going to find that scarf right there. All right, so I'm going to stick that to the back. And then I typically hold it with 2 fingers. Slide it in. And then I tend to hold it with 1 finger and tighten it with the other. But I really should make sure that my orientation is right. So I'm going to stick that needle orientation magnet on there. And that's pretty far to the right. So I'm going to twist that back. Now I'm at a slight disadvantage because you guys via the camera are lined up on this really well, and I super am not. But I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to tighten this back down, double check it. That looks, oh wait, I'm looking at a mirror image, aren't I? Yeah, that's a little to the left. That's not going to work out well for me at all. So let's loosen this up. Let's rotate this just a little bit. That's a little bit better. Now, one thing I will notice is as I tighten this up, the final turn, I may see it slightly rotate, so just kind of watch that. That looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to take this off. Don't forget to take this off. I'm going to stick it on that metal piece that holds up my thread tree, just so I don't lose it, because I'm me and I lose stuff. And then I will kick this back out, and I will thread up my needle again. And I like to, well, first of all, I like to trim this up. Trick when rethreading needles. If you hold the thread really tight and trim it, it'll fray the edge. But if you leave it loose, it'll stay nice and sharp for you. There you go. All right, so I'm going to come back in. And I apologize if you guys are commenting. I totally can't see it because I'm nowhere near my computer. All right, so that's threaded up. Once I get that threaded up, I then kick with the grabber. I kick that thread back into the trap, and then I kick it back out to guard. But I will put this in whenever I am changing the needle. All right, now I'm going to grab that needle magnet and the old needle, so I have props when I come back over here. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to go back in and see if I see anything. All right. So needle orientation, incredibly, incredibly important. If it is too far to the right or at all to the left, that loop of thread that's formed right at that scarf on the back of the needle, again, won't be in the right spot and can cause you thread breaks or just even a completely missed stitch, things like that. So keep that in mind. All right, let's talk about the size of needles. So when we're talking about the size of needles, it comes on the package, obviously, it tells you. It tells you in teeny, teeny letters right in here, or I guess numbers. And there are typically two numbers. So you'll see needle sizes in something like 7511 or 80/12. You'll see those kinds of things. And what does that mean? I have no idea what the second number means, but the first number is actually the diameter of the needle blade. So right across there. So again, needle blade, not up here at the shoulder, not down here at the point, but right across here is where we're looking. And so I realize I did this backwards. All right, I can see the size on this. I had this all planned out with the one that I just put in the machine, but the calipers that Scott was using in the last session, I just grabbed and there we go. So if you look, I just measured the diameter of that needle. See it? Where I measured, right on that blade, and it's 0.75 millimeters. So it is in hundredths of a millimeter that you're getting that number. So 7511, which is what this is 0.75 millimeters wide. So keep that in mind when you're trying to deal with needle size choices in relationship to designs. If I had something like an 8-point stitch in my design, and I'm trying to sew it with an 80/12 needle, my needle and my stitch are the same size, and that's probably not going to work very well. Wow, that snow's really going. It's even going to work less if I'm trying it with a bigger needle. So when you hear Scott or myself or Mike talk about minimum stitch widths or stitch lengths, the reason largely is either restraints due to fabric or thread size or needle size. So the smaller the needle, the finer detail I can use or achieve. The larger the needle, less details available to me, right? Because think about it like I'm using a really fine pen or a really thick marker, which I totally don't have on my desk. But that you can kind of liken it to those tools as well. All right, so needle size. The first number, diameter of the needle. Second number, I don't know. And they both are relationships to size, but it doesn't mean as much to me as that first number. So pay attention to that first number. All right, let's go back to the manual. And we can look at these different sizes, and there's quite a range And when I was talking with Mike before this, he said he's even had people use a 55-7. I've never used one. I would struggle trying to thread one, I'm sure, because they are so tiny. But there are lots of sizes. Do I use all of these sizes all the time? No. Typically, I'm going to be using something kind of middle range. I believe the machines, I'm going to get myself in trouble. I know they used to ship with 7511s. I think they still do. If they don't, they might ship with 7010s. Don't know. Sorry about that. But that's a nice middle range and will work for a lot of your applications. If you are starting to deal with more abrasive materials, and I don't care if that's the material that you're sewing through or the material that you're sewing with. So if I'm going through a cotton duct that's a little bit scratchier, or well, the last session that we just talked about, some of those thicker caps that are a little bit scratchy, with that buckram in the back, things like that. If you are thread being shoved through there, that's going to probably feel a little bit like sandpaper and probably going to be very abrasive and possibly give you thread breaks. So using a larger needle will give you a larger hole and can ease some of that abrasion and get through it without a thread break. Okay, that kind of makes sense. The other direction, smaller needles. I would use a smaller needle for finer fabrics, finer threads. So if I'm using a 60 weight or a 75 weight, that's something that I would definitely consider. I would also consider using a smaller needle if I'm, again, doing that smaller lettering, finer detail in my embroidery design. So that's some of the things that I consider when making a needle size choice. If you think about the amount of metal that's involved, obviously a thicker needle is going to be stronger than a thinner one. So if you're getting a lot of deflection, going up a size may help alleviate some of that and deflections when the needle's kind of moving around a little bit. All right. Hopefully that answers some questions on sizes. Although, one thing I should mention, if you are doing embroidery and you are seeing holes in your garment, maybe try a smaller needle and that might help too. Also, just changing your needle, you might have a burr on the needle that's catching fibers and causing you issues that way too. All right, so let's look at the styles of needle that we have available to us. So in the manual, we talk about needle points and needle coatings. There's information there. I'm going to go back to the graphic that I made just for this, and we'll talk about this. So I kind of zoomed in, I kind of exaggerated, and I apparently left lines I didn't mean to leave. Sorry about that. But largely, we have different styles, and I'm referencing, everybody uses kind of letter codes for these. I'm referencing the Gross-Beckert letter codes right now, but you have kind of sharper needles. This is typically used for finer details and with fine wovens. This is not something that I'm going to be using all the time. They have an RG, which is a rounded point. It's a small ball. It's a very universal, or as much as we can get, a universal embroidery needle. I use that one very frequently, probably more than anything else. And so that's one that I use quite frequently and works really well for me. You also can have ball points, and you can have a light ball or a medium ball, and I again have exaggerated these a little bit just to see them a little bit better on screen. But if you think about this, this is rounded, and the idea is as it's going through a knit, it will kind of move that thread or the fibers kind of out of the way and goes through. And with traditional embroidery at the slower speeds that we used to sew, sure. At the high speeds that we sew now, maybe a little bit less so. We might actually start to damage at high speeds. So in that case, I would tend to go back to that kind of RG, that universal, that kind of right in between sweet spot needle. And that's going to work really, really well for, again, a lot of stuff at higher speeds. And we all like to sew at higher speeds because we like to get our work done faster. So that's kind of it. There are other specialty needles out there. Honestly, I tend to stick to RG most of the time. And then I may go to a sharp every now and then for something like leather that I want to punch through a little bit better. Although RG, honestly, lately has been treating me really well. So, all right, let's take a look at some other styles. So again, I'm referencing that Gross-Becker needle. You have different needle coatings. You have chrome, which is kind of your standard needle. It's that silvery color. You saw that on my machine. And it's not a bad option at all. And some of the difference come in to how long does a needle last. So we already talked about changing a needle, but how long does it last? Well, a standard needle, so that chrome, lasts 4 to 8 solid sewing hours. How many hours has the needle on needle 2 run? I have no idea. I'm not going to track it. I am going to run until that needle fails. What does that look like? Well, that looks like a burr, or it's bent, or it's broken, or I'm getting thread breaks, or I'm damaging the garment. So I tend to run until they fail, and then I change them. The other option is a titanium coated. And titanium coated, you saw them on my machine again. They're kind of that gold color. And those can typically last 2 to 3 times as long. That's awesome. They are a little bit more expensive, but not 2 to 3 times more expensive. So why wouldn't I use them all the time? They're stronger. They are slicker. So you'll hear me when I'm talking about if I use adhesive or if I'm sewing through kind of a grippy material, you'll hear me say that I'll use a coated needle. That's what I'm talking about. I'll use a titanium coated needle to kind of ease that through there and get less adhesive on my needle, in my hook, in the works, all of the above. Now, they are stronger, but they have less flex. So if you're getting needle deflection, it may actually break your needle. Okay, how do I get through a job like that? Well, the standard or chrome needles have a little bit of flex to them. So if you're getting needle deflection and you kind of need that to get through a job, sounds totally counterintuitive, I get it, but it's a real thing. So if I'm sewing a cap and I'm getting needle deflection, I may actually choose to go with a standard chrome needle with that little bit of flex, and it can actually get me through a job that a titanium needle would break on. It's kind of weird and mind-blowing, but it's real. All right, so we talked about the coatings. Other kind of options we have is the shape and the taper of the needle, as well as the shank. So in a previous session, we talked about the KK needles that are the shorter shank. And if you look, oops, sorry. There we go. If you look, you can see that the shank of the KK actually starts a little higher up. And that's going to give you a longer blade, which gives you a little bit more depth going through. The other thing that you may see is with Gross-Becker, you may see a San Juan. Gebadur is just their titanium, but the San Juan is actually the shape of the needle. So if I come in here and look, the shoulder is almost a little bit longer on here, which gives it a little bit more strength. But it's still tapered. It's still going to give you a nice fine point. It's just they changed the shape of it a little bit, and that can change the hole in the garment. It can change how that thread's going through. So you've got some options there as well. I have used it for probably a year or more now and have had really, really good luck with it. So kind of a good little tool there, or a good option for you. So we have gone through sizes, tips, coatings. We've gone through the overall shape of the needle, so short shank, long shank, all that kind of good stuff. You've got that part number for that needle orientation, very important, 34274. But try changing your needles with your embroidery applications, and just have a few on hand, give it a shot. One other thing that I tend to do, I have a dry erase board in my studio numbered 1 through 16, and I just keep what's on there and when I changed it, just to have that available to me. I don't color code mine. I tend to lose track, so my dry erase board is my memory for that. Tends to work really well for me. Color coding tends to work really well for other people. So take a look at your needle options. Hopefully this answers any questions you had, and see you next time. Thank you so much.